Welcome to Eggs and Issues, a monthly business forum presented by the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce, bringing timely economic discussion to the region for nearly 40 years. Thank you to our sponsors and partners. Presenting sponsors: Central Maine Power, Maine Health, MEMIC, and Maine Community Bank. Cooperating sponsors: Martins Point Healthcare and NBT Bank. Reception sponsors: Clark Insurance, KeyBank, and Pretty Flaherty. Community Corner sponsor: Goral Palmer. Tomorrow's leaders and entrepreneurs sponsors: AAA Northern New England and Mascoma Bank. Parking sponsor: People Credit Union. Photography sponsor: Wooler and Company. Media partners: WGAN, Maine Trust for Local News, WMTW, Maine's CW, and Wind Media Company. Business news sponsor: Maine Biz. Venue partner: the University of Southern Maine. And thank you to our special community partners: Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, Kennebec Savings Bank, MEMIC, Spectrum Healthcare Partners, Southern Maine Community College, and the University of Southern Maine. And now, please welcome Portland Community Chamber President Rob Atkinson.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. We're almost at Friday. You're almost there. But thank you very much for coming this morning, and welcome to Eggs and Issues. We're so glad you could join us this morning. This is the final installment of our spring semester of Eggs and Issues, Maine in Focus. I cannot believe that, Quincy. My name is Rob Atkinson. I'm the Director of Marketing and Public Relations at MEMIC, and I'm honored to serve as the volunteer president of the Portland Community Chamber of Commerce. Today's program, From Augusta to Action, Legislative Outcomes and Business Impact, is hosted in partnership with the Maine State Chamber of Commerce and will provide a recap of the most recent legislative session, as well as look ahead at the policies shaping the future of Maine's business community. Before we jump in, I do want to thank all our sponsors of Eggs and Issues who make this event possible. Without our sponsor support of Eggs and Issues, the Chamber could not deliver the high-quality speakers, panels, and presentations you've come to expect, so thank you very much. I'd also like to extend a very sincere thank you to our special community partners. These businesses and organizations support not just Eggs and Issues, but all of the 70-plus events the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce produces throughout the year. Yay, MEMIC. As I mentioned, this program is hosted in partnership with the Maine State Chamber of Commerce, and we'd like to take a moment to recognize their breakfast sponsor here as well. Now we'd like to recognize the following businesses who are new members of the Chambers. This is really exciting. We're grateful to those who have joined over the past month, bringing their ideas and leadership to our network. So please welcome us in joining them to the Chamber. That is fantastic. Big reminder, registration is now open for Imagine Portland on Wednesday, May 27th in Portland, our annual awards celebration. We hope to see you there at Live at Madrid's, right? Live at Madrid's this year, new. A quick reminder, complimentary parking is available for all Eggs and Issues event. Just validate with promo code EGGS2526, and if you need help, like me, ask the Chamber for help. This month's Community Corner is the Elder Abuse Institute of Maine. The Elder Abuse Institute of Maine works to ensure that older adults affected by abuse can get the support they need to live their life on their own terms. The Institute serves older Mainers statewide through 3 key programs focused on safety, stability, and independence. Elder Service Connections partners with Adult Protective Services to provide client-led, community-based support that helps older adults remain safely housed and connected to essential resources. Martha's Cottage offers safe, confidential transitional housing along with individualized advocacy to help older victims of abuse move towards long-term stability. And the Institute also operates a Helping Voice, a warm line that provides real-time guidance for people who need help reporting suspected elder abuse. Together, these programs support and empower more than 600 older adults each year in Maine. If you're interested in learning more about their work, please see one of the representatives here today. And in fact, I think we have some representatives of the elder abuse right here in the audience. If you'd please stand and be recognized for your work. love to. Thank you very much for the work you do. Our Tomorrow Leaders and Entrepreneurs program gives local students free access to eggs and issues. So for the students joining us in the room today, thank you all for joining us. Now, it's time to dive into today's discussion, which will be moderated by Chamber President and CEO Quincy Hensel. She will be joined by her fabulous guest, Yellow Light Breen, President and CEO of the Maine Development Foundation, Heather Johnson, President and CEO of the Waypoint Collaborative, and Patrick Woodcock, President and CEO of the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. Let's welcome them all to the stage.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a great crowd, and I think just a testament to everybody's interest in the future of the state of Maine. So I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank my panelists here, Patrick Woodcock, Maine State Chamber of Commerce, Heather Johnson, Waypoint Collaborative, and former Commissioner of the Department of Economic and Community Development, and Yellow Light Breen with the Maine Development Foundation. And before we get started, I do want to welcome, I have some special guests joining us today, some of mine and Patrick's colleagues. The Maine Association of Chamber of Commerce executives are with us today. They are with regional chambers from all across the state. If you're here, can you please raise your hand? Hey, thank you. Woo-hoo! Yes, we have an association for all of the regional chambers in the state of Maine, and it's really a great group of individuals. We get together a few times a year, and this year we are hosting our annual conference in Portland. So we're all going to be gathering at the Rue Institute immediately after this event. So just thank you all for coming here. We're really excited that you're joining us for eggs, and I'm excited to spend today and tomorrow with you all. So with that, I want to jump into the program. We have a lot that we want to cover. We want to start with a quick recap of this past legislative session. And I'm going to do that with Patrick. So I'm going to have a little Q&A with Patrick to cover some of there was a lot that happened. There's always a lot that happens in the legislative session. We want to cover some of the key issues that we were working on this session and kind of inform you as to like how those went and where they are today. And then I want to have a conversation with all of the panelists around a recently released report called the Maine Economic Vision 2035. And so I know Yellow is going to level set us and kind of explain to us how we came to the key priorities in that report. And as always, we're going to leave room for questions at the end. So should you have any questions that come up, we definitely want to hear from you at the end of the program. So with that, Patrick, we spent a lot of time together, I'm going to say. Like, for anybody who might think the Portland Chamber and the Maine Chamber do not work together, that is 100% false. I think I have seen more of Patrick than like anybody over the last 5 months, and that's just going to continue over the next 2 weeks in particular. The Maine State Chamber does an incredible job representing business interests in Augusta. We're up there, a lot of the other regional chambers are up there as well, but we're not up there every single day like Patrick and his team as at the Maine State Chamber. So I just want to recognize them for all of the work they do during the legislative session. And so Patrick, I'll just start with kind of a level-setting question that for those in the room that maybe didn't follow the legislative session as closely as we did, what did you see as the biggest economic or business-related themes that came out of Augusta this year?
Yeah, well, thank you, Quincy, for hosting this forum. I think it's incredibly important, the partnership that we've had, the partnership with all the regional chambers, what they mean for their community. This is a time of incredible economic dynamics at the national level and in the state. And ultimately, what I saw the legislature is an outcome where we're going to have one of the more consequential legislative sessions that will have impact for the business community for years to come. Everybody knows the headlines and a new surtax. Everybody knows the headlines about data privacy. We wanted to really use this opportunity to get down into the details of what are, as the dust has settled, what this really means for the business community. You know, the thing that really drives me is these two metrics that keep me up at night. You know, I was talking to Katie Shorey, and I think we all knew that Maine was going to be discovered one day. It is a wonderful place to live and work. And the pandemic accelerated that. And this really highlights this. Population growth in 22-23 exceeded the national average. You have to go back to a different century to find when that occurred. Moreover, GDP growth for 2 years exceeding the national average. You have to go back to the 1990s to find a period where we did that. And that is an incredible opportunity for our state. You know, the issue that has grappled Maine for so long, demographic challenges, aging population. And what I'm concerned about is it's one year, it doesn't create a trend yet, but we are entering a new chapter with the recent data. You know, we've moved from a top 10 state in population growth from a per capita standpoint to 25th, most recent census data. GDP growth, you know, 1 year, but we've fallen from an outperforming state to an underperforming state. And the aspect that I start to see revealing itself is our headwinds. Housing, energy costs. You know, that's what I hear anecdotally, but you're starting to see that reveal itself. And I really think, you know, what really unites us and what we'll talk about with our economic plan is really keeping the trend lines that we've had for the first half of this decade. It is imperative that we make 2025 an outlier of a trend that continues population growth and outperformance of the state's economy. So it is a moment of opportunity, but we have to be very cognizant of these headwinds for our state's economy.
That's great, and I've chosen just like 4 topics or 4 issues that we were heavily involved in this session that I want you to touch on before we turn to the report. Let's start with the budget, because you had mentioned the budget, and the budget is always like gets a lot of attention. There's a lot of pieces to the budget, so it involves a lot of different groups and individuals. This year, there was a new surtax that was included for high-income earners, also for pass-through businesses. Let's talk a little bit about what the debate around the budget tells us about how Maine is thinking about economic growth right now, and what do you think the impact of that is going to be?
You know, regrettably, I would describe the budget is there were a lot of, and I won't go into the political dynamics. Really, what's meaningful for businesses is the outcome. And ultimately, I saw it an incredibly missed opportunity for the state. The day of the Appropriations Committee, I started it with a press conference celebrating when the legislature came together for research and development investments. I saw Senator Peirce here earlier triumphing a research and development bond that brought the two parties together. $25 million that's leveraging hundreds of millions of dollars in our state's economy. That's old shipyards investing in Belfast. That's a new processing facility in Goldsboro. That's innovation. And you know, we ended the press conference with, we can continue this. And regrettably, that evening, the legislature moved forward with, the Appropriations Committee moved forward with a supplemental budget that did not include research and development. And you know, when I look at the supplemental, it was really unfortunately focused on some short-term interests rather than long-term interests. I'll go through the pieces that we're concerned about. Budget Stabilization Fund. We have moved to build up a reserve that stabilizes our budget when a recession may occur. We're very exposed to consumer spending. And we built up this budget to about $1 billion. As MDF has shown, we only can tolerate that for a moderate recession. The budget, despite having really very little challenges with revenue, devoted about $300 million from the Budget Stabilization Fund and devoted it for affordability checks. That's a short-term effort to address affordability, where a lot of the businesses that I see, a lot of the households, they want to see long-term addressing the fundamentals of housing and energy costs. Tax conformity. What you start with a pro-growth budget is encouraging businesses to invest in research and development. Since 1969, the state has aligned with the federal tax code with expensing research and development at 100% in the year that it's incurred. Most states, almost all, will conform with the federal research and development to allow businesses to recoup that depreciation. Maine is departing from that. Large businesses are not going to be able to incur that expense. Furthermore, it removed a property tax rebate. All states have looked at, you never want to create an incentive structure that you don't encourage businesses to invest in equipment. So as a result, the legislature has enacted a business equipment tax reimbursement that says if you invest in modern equipment, that doesn't count against you for property taxes. They remove that for retail businesses. And lastly, the pass-through entity tax, as well as a surtax on individuals, I look at it and talking to proponents, there was an argument that the federal tax code enabled a benefit for higher income individuals. I think that's the wrong question. I really look at tax policy as what will grow the state's economy. Is this going to expand the state's economy or be a burden? And the aspect that in a state of small businesses that I'm concerned about is it's about 20–30% of these individuals that will be subject to this income threshold once. When they sell a business, and I don't think that's really the spirit of what the legislature's trying to impose here. We have to look at our competitiveness from a regional standpoint, and this will catapult Maine's marginal income tax to the highest level in New England. So I do think this is a lost opportunity for the state. I do think we can overcome this. I do think we can look at a pro-growth agenda outlined in MEV 35, but I was disappointed. This was the first budget that the Maine State Chamber of Commerce has opposed in the last 3 years.
That's helpful. There's so much in here that we could talk about in more detail, but I'm going to move us through just a couple more key policy issues, and then we'll move on to the second part of the program. Let's talk about housing. Not a new topic for this audience. I don't think I have been on this stage anytime in the last 2 years where housing has not come out of my mouth. There was a lot happening in Augusta around housing, and I just want to get your take on, do you think we made meaningful progress around unlocking housing production and affordability, or is there still work to be done? And I think I know the answer to the second part of that question, but talk a little bit about what we did accomplish this session.
Well, first of all, I think the business community needs to have high expectations for housing. We don't need marginal progress. We need a breakthrough year. As Maine has been discovered, we're being rediscovered now as an unaffordable state for those who are in their 20s and 30s and those who are looking to relocate to Maine. I see this as an issue that can unite Republicans and Democrats. It's a big theme in our report. I will say a couple aspects that I was encouraged about. I think the legislature enacting an ability to create a permit by rule. So you don't have to go through a lengthy application process with the Department of Environmental Protection for a housing project, but if you meet specific parameters, you can move forward. We have to have that mentality. I look at some states that have completely united behind saying yes to housing. And that is certainly the partnership that we're trying to build, Quincy, the partnership with the local chambers. We have to have the business community at the local level saying yes to housing. So did we have that breakthrough this year? No, but I do think we can. and it's really creating a regulatory environment that streamlines, lowering the cost, but moreover at the community level, that there are incentives for municipalities from the state for those pro-housing leaders.
Thank you. And I'll just add to that, like Patrick and I were talking before this, there is a really, really important role for all of you in this audience around housing. And as we move forward next legislative session around housing policy and reforms, like we are going to be reaching out to all of you for your help. Like your voices are so powerful, and we absolutely need you talking about pro-housing policies. So I know you hear from our organization all the time, you hear from the Maine State Chamber all the time, but like when we're asking for you to please write letters or to speak up, I mean, we need it to happen, and we need to happen more than it's happening, because if you speak, I do feel like we will be able to really move the needle around housing and housing production in Maine. So that's my pitch for next legislative session. You'll hear from us again on this issue. Here's an example of a policy initiative where the business community did speak up, and we ended up being successful, and that is data privacy, which this has been an issue that has been in the State House for several years. We are working to try to pass a data privacy law that balances consumer protections with the business's ability to still continue to do business. This year, the issue is up again, and I'll have Patrick just give, we could talk about this for a really long time, and we'll try to be succinct, but just explain to the audience kind of what happened to that bill, how it ended, and what we anticipate happening next legislative session around data privacy.
Well, I'll begin. This is a real issue. I mean, I think it's an abdication of Congress. There absolutely should be a federal data privacy law that protects sensitive data. The states naturally have tried to fill that void, and the question is, do you fill it with a consistent framework that other states have adopted, or do you develop a outlier structure? And for me, I am always going to be cautious. This is the standard by which businesses reach customers. And whether it's a hotel in Old Orchard Beach that has pivoted from Quebec tourists to New Englanders, they are able to use digital tools to attract these customers. You've got to be really careful. You saw those economic figures. You've got to be really careful at dampening a regulatory environment. So what I was encouraged about is it's the first time in my tenure that I think the business community spoke with clarity. I think it was led by some of our most prominent business leaders in the state. And I think it really resonated with the legislature. I think when they heard that Lost Valley uses this tool, and it's really allowed them to build up a new generation of skiers, that some of our sports teams use this to bring people into the rink. And you know, we have to be careful creating a standard that is that incongruous with other states in the region. I'm always going to, you know, and the report highlights this, you know, what are the other states doing? You know, can we learn from those states? Do we always have to do our own approach? But I really do think the business community, it did signal that when they speak with clarity, when they say that this would impact us, the legislature does listen.
No, I agree with that, and just want to thank anyone in the room who did speak out on that issue. And it will be back next session, and we're committed to making a policy that works for both consumers and for businesses. And like Patrick said, we really would like Congress to act in this realm, but in lieu of that, states are taking action, rightfully so. So we will see how that plays out, especially on the federal level. In the interest of time, I want to shift to the Maine Economic Vision 2035. Did I get that right? I feel like it just came out of my mouth wrong. No, I got it right. Thank you. Okay, I'm like,
it's a mouthful.
Yeah, only had one cup of coffee, which is essentially like a roadmap to strengthen our state's economy and really help us inform choices that we have to make moving ahead. And so, Yellow, I'm going to turn it over to you to walk us through the survey that was conducted that kind of leads us to these key priorities in the report.
Yeah, good morning. Yellow Light Green Maine Development Foundation. We do not lobby, and so part of the foundation of this partnership over the years between MDF and the State Chamber of Commerce is to marry what we're known for which is trusted nonpartisan data about the Maine economy, with the Chamber's reach into the real world experience of the business community. And really, going back to 2010, if there's one word then and now that ties these projects with MDF and the Chamber together, it's the word investment. It started with a thesis called Maine's Investment Imperative by the incomparable Lori LaChance, former head of MDF and former head of Thomas College. And what she's famous for, the idea of in search of silver buckshot, knowing there is no silver bullet around the economy. But in this vein, I think it's a pivot from, the issues of the day in Augusta, including sometimes playing defense on those issues, to what's the longer term positive vision of sustained solutions that we need to move the economy forward. And so Maine Economic Vision 2035, you can go to the website, maineeconomicvision2035.com. There's a lot packed in there because we want to get to the conversation this morning. So, a cornerstone has always been to go, frankly, ask people. So it's not the three of us in a room saying, this is what we surmise is important to Maine businesses anecdotally. Let's go ask them. And sometimes we're surprised over the years by what they said. Sometimes it confirms everything we might have thought going in. And we always ask them not just what's negative in terms of constraints and headwinds to growing here in Maine, but we ask them, what are the assets here that are critical to your growth? And I always like to start there. 66% say it's the local talent of Maine people, which is why they're here. 33% say it's proximity to key markets. Not surprisingly, being close to some of the densest markets on the North American continent and in the world is really important and explains why they're still picking us despite some of our cost disadvantages. The other two I think are interesting, key partnerships, especially with the community college and other educational institutions, and the ecosystem of support, which includes a lot of people in this room, local chambers of commerce, anchor institutions, the Main Street programs that we operate at MDF by way of example. So, it's important to say we've got assets. The interesting thing is that the workforce is both the number one asset and the number one barrier in terms of just finding enough sheer number of people to grow our businesses and the talent and skill levels in the business. And in the survey, when asked what's your number one workforce constraint, it comes back to housing. We have all those stories of providing, transitional housing for new hires, and the second it goes away, they leave the state, and so on. So it all comes together, and this I think sums up the opposite side of what are the headwinds. Interestingly, and you can see the largest bar there at the bottom with some of the cost drivers. But even more than the cost drivers, they told us it's the predictability and consistency of the regulatory environment. And that is different than some of what we heard in years past in doing similar products together. And then you can see, as I mentioned, workforce development and housing right there. So what we did is we distilled all this down, plus all the data. Patrick and Heather and I are data wonks, to be sure. And so the on-the-street insight and the data, and we distilled it down to 4 areas, and I really credit Heather for this. And by design, they're equibalanced between what would be the perspective of a business or an investor on this issue, so business competitiveness, and then its close twin in terms of productivity, research, and private investment. And then on the household side, and so workforce and wages are critical to the well-being of households as well as the growth of businesses. And then housing affordability, which is the biggest bite. I won't go through all of the goals, but you'll see about 3 ambitious aspirational goals under each of these 4 areas when you flip through. And then when you turn to the solutions section, you'll see roughly 8 to 12 solutions at various levels of generality and specificity throughout these 4 areas. The goals are intentionally ambitious. Our little advisory committee from both of our boards said, you know what? Maybe in real life we can only get halfway to some of these goals over this time horizon. But we need to get all the way there as a state. And we would rather challenge Mainers and gubernatorial candidates and others to say, what would it actually take to get all the way there? So, in terms of not only improving our standing in GDP growth, by making the investment funnel in terms of permitting easier, to get Maine's energy rates to the lowest in New England. Parenthetically, a lot of these goals are very consonant with the annual measures of growth report goals for MDF, and that's intentional. You know, and be able to encourage that investment in a lot of ways. Productivity research and private investment, we trail productivity per worker in the country by about 20%. We've made progress, and to Patrick's point, we got to build on the progress. 20% is a big lift. Can we get there? Maybe not in one decade, but if we don't challenge ourselves to try, then we won't be growing opportunity for Mainers and attracting the investors we want. We know that our level of investment in research and development, despite some of these recent success stories, is still 1/3 of the nation. How can we incrementally chip away at that and make some bold throws to move closer to the nation, which is triple where we are? So these are pretty challenging goals. Housing affordability, we know will take an all hands on deck approach, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a lot this morning. 64% of Mainers cannot afford the typical house in their own community, and that's going to be a big lift. Workforce and wages. We know, and a core part of this document, of course, is, listen, we're in a global competition for investment. Even if you're a homegrown Maine business, you have to decide whether it's worth reinvesting here or parking the money somewhere else in your savings, or whether to grow here or to grow in some other geography. So yes, we need investors from around the world, but it's also, you know, what does this environment look like for homegrown Maine investors making difficult decisions? It's not a morality play. You know, it's a pragmatic calculus that they have to do. So we know part of the returns that we want to create have to go back to the capital investors, but we want a fair share to go to Maine workers as well. And Maine wages trail the nation by about 20% on average as well. And we know that a big part of that is investing in the talents and skills and credentialing of the workforce so that, you know, they can upskill and improve a living wage and hopefully even far beyond a living wage in their own household. We're at 55% today of Maine's working age population with something beyond high school, and consistent with what Maine Spark put out last week, we're positing we got to go to something like 70%. We need more workers. Wave of retirements, 25,000 net more new workers would get us roughly back to par in terms of the working age population in our state in the coming decade. And then finally, we know it all starts early. I will say it not only starts early, but a lot of what we know we have to do are two-generation strategies where it's both the adult and the young kids in a household that are learning and changing their life prospects. You know, we've sunk from leading the nation in certain K-12 metrics to lagging, and we stake a pole in the ground here that we want to lead once again. So there's a lot packed in there, and we look forward to unpacking a little bit in the next few minutes.
Thank you, Yellow. That was great. And one of the things, I mean, there was a lot in there that Yellow said that's incredibly interesting. And I know he had mentioned predictability was kind of one of the undercurrents of the survey that businesses like to see. We hear that a lot in the greater Portland region as well. Heather, I want to start with you, because the survey did find that a majority of respondents believe it's harder to do business in Maine today than it was just a few years ago, yet many are still planning to invest here. So can you explain a little bit about what that tension means about our opportunities and our challenges in the state?
I can try, yeah. So, you know, it's interesting because, right, those shouldn't go together, right? They should be separate. But what we're really seeing are businesses want to do business here, right? People that we're talking to that are potentially new investors want to do business here. They aren't necessarily captured as well in this survey, but the themes are consistent. But we're seeing projects not get all the way through. And so while they want to invest here, some of their projects aren't getting all the way through the process for a variety of reasons, right? They just get too cost burdened at some point in a project, right? If it's multi-years for permitting, they will lose that financial edge and ability to close those projects. So what we clearly see is after about 7 or 8 months, the close rate of those projects goes dramatically down. Because the math changes. And so I think what we're seeing there are businesses really want to reinvest in Maine, but they need our help, and they need us to make some kind of clear decisions about how they can do that in order to be successful.
And I'll turn to Patrick. One of the strongest themes in this report is the economic issues are so interconnected. How do you see the relationship between business competitiveness, workforce growth, affordability, and the quality of life in Maine?
You know, I just build that there are some employers that have really integrated into the community college system. And we have that pipeline. I think about Bath Iron Works, what they've been able to do, our nursing programs, construction. But I think you're seeing that a lot of companies have not integrated into that pipeline. And so there is a disconnect that we're not expanding the workforce to all corners of the Maine economy and geographically. So I do think there are examples to build on. I just look that you know, we've always had higher energy costs than the national average. We've just gotten to the point where the complaints I'm getting from my members is not that it's a high energy cost, they don't even believe their bill. So it's gotten to the point where it has really become a dramatic headwind for our state. And we do get into, you know, how to stabilize what has really become. There's no reason we shouldn't have the lowest energy prices in the Northeast, given all our natural resources, all of the energy that we're producing, and you know, it really is going to take a partnership to reduce some of the public policy costs while maintaining a commitment to our climate goals. And furthermore, my concern is that we have still not addressed the Achilles heel that has bitten us now twice, and that is our reliance on imported natural gas, where we are the only region in North America that imports gas from overseas. Japan, Germany, United Kingdom are on a war footing right now to try to expand their domestic natural gas supplies, say yes to renewables and transmission, and New England has to have that same mentality. We're all concerned about where gas prices are right now, diesel prices. The real issue for New England is what would happen next winter with what's happening globally. So there are all these components that are headwinds. I think the companies that have built a pipeline for labor, that have been able to insulate themselves from some of these energy costs, their own on-site generation, but we really have to recognize that a lot of companies have not done that, and that they are not going to be able to expand if we don't address this collectively.
What are some, I'm going to just dig into that a little deeper, because I hear that all the time as well about energy. What are some of the proposals in the report that are being recommended in order to do exactly what you're talking about? Yeah,
one aspect that I think all New England states need to look at, it was recognized by the National Berkeley Laboratory. They did a regression model of, you know, everybody has this rhetoric about energy pricing. They did a regression model of really what has been the driver of energy costs. And Maine, it said storm costs. So our costs of recovering, they become more frequent, more significant. We need to invest in a reliable distribution system so we don't bring in out-of-state workers that cost hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes literally. Secondly, our renewable portfolio standard costs have gone from about $10 million a year to the last compliance year, $120 million. And I think there's a question for the renewable developers, you know, can we lower these costs and still develop renewables? Renewable costs have plummeted, but our costs for our public policy have expanded. So I think we do need to come together to review these public policies. And ultimately, a lot of states have also said, no, does it really make sense that ratepayers support all of these programs? Is there a way that state bonding, that general fund could be used to reduce these costs that hurt not just the business community, but this is the top issue for AARP. People on fixed income, low income households, we've got to get a handle on these energy costs.
Thank you. Thank you for doing a deeper dive on that. Yellow, I'm going to turn to you about education. We were on this stage last month with a panel talking about education, And this report really acknowledges the struggles we are facing in public education. So can you talk a little bit about why fourth grade proficiency scores matter so much to the economy, and what can we do to improve them?
Yeah, you know, it's one of those correlations that is stunning and scary, which is the correlation between whether you are reading on grade level by the end of third grade and are able to be numerate and compute in math, and what all subsequent academic, economic, and life outcomes are for that kid. The correlation is astounding, and this is not new. And similarly, you know, we know too, what you're exposed to, 0 to 2, 0 to 3, really counts in getting you to that third grade marker. So, you know, there's areas in this report where you have to invest, there's areas where you have to streamline, and there's areas where we have to strategically align better to our own goals. Early childhood and early elementary is a place we have to invest among all others. I worked at the Department of Education in the late 90s, got to jump on a train as it was pulling into the station as Maine had gone from worst to first in the country in the preceding 15 years. So it can be done, but it's going to take an all of society commitment to this. I think part of our dialogue around education gets very skewed because I think we recognize that it's a systemic communal issue, and yet our old way of thinking about it is that, you know, early childhood is the family's problem, and K-12 is the teacher's problem, and the rest of life is on you, the individual. When, of course, at all three of those phases, you know, it's about all of us and the support systems that we're building for these learners.
Thank you. I'm going to try to get through one or two more questions. Heather, I'm going to turn to you. Okay. And this question really, you know, it is what we talk about constantly around policy issues, and that's really the balancing the needs of businesses and with workers, and recognizing that they either are going to succeed or struggle together. So what does that balance look like in practice, particularly around wages, housing, healthcare, and workforce development?
Yeah, thanks, Quincy. So we tried in this report to create a really intentional linkage so that we could start having this conversation. You know, a lot of times you'll hear people either want investor supports or want business supports or want worker supports, but don't want the other side. And the reality is you don't succeed without both of them. If you look at strong economies across the US, they succeed together. The only way to raise wages is to have businesses growing, right? Or new businesses being added. And the only way for businesses to grow is to have great workforce, right? And so there's no way to separate them. But when we start talking about policy, a lot of times it's really easy to start separate them and pick individual pieces of policy that sometimes hurts the other piece there. So I think the concept here is really to think more holistically about this and to think about it connected. And I think Yellow mentioned, it's a much more pragmatic look. It's less about the ideology on an economy and more about the practical use of, you can't start a business without great workers, and if you're a worker, you can't do that without having a great business. Sure, some people can start their own businesses. Absolutely, they should do that, and all of these things will help that as well. You'll see a whole entrepreneurial section here. So I just think really kind of forcing the discussion of not allowing those things to be separated. As you think about housing, right? There are companies that will make housing. There are ways for us to invest further up the chain on housing, support workers and economic growth while we build housing, right? So there's a lot of those pieces that just kind of naturally go together. But I would say one of the goals of this report is to be very practical about the fact that it's not an either or, it's an and.
So my final question is going to be for all of you. And so people in the audience, think about the questions you might have. But you know the categories in the report, like a lot of this isn't new. We've seen this before. Like there wasn't anything that was like incredibly shocking. So like what's changed, and why do you think we can have success now in moving the needle on these different priorities? And anybody can go first. I'd love to hear from all three of you.
Well, I would just say, I'd go back to what Patrick said earlier in the hour, which is Maine's economy is incredibly dynamic. When I took this job at MDF 10 years ago and we put out measures of growth, there were probably 15 things jockeying to be a red flag, and we were hard pressed to find what we call a gold star. And we also knew what the report was going to say before we even pulled the data. And now we've seen this incredible dynamism, some going for us. The broadband build out in our state has quadrupled access to high-speed broadband. Some going against us, like with housing affordability. Used to be a strength, now a headwind. So I think what's changed for me over recent years is this sense coming out of the pandemic, we can change things for the better. We can attract more people. We can invest in R&D. And it's really about doubling down on the success and connecting the pockets of excellence.
Yeah, I would say I agree with, now that we've seen what success looks and feels like a little bit, I think it's easier to get people having that discussion about, yes, it is doable here because we've seen it, so that's one thing. The other thing I would say that's a little bit different are there are really clear solutions, some of them incremental and some of them much more significant, and you almost need to do both. And really this thinking about solving short-term solutions but getting the long-term gain is a really important one, and I think we've tried to weave that into these solutions. So it's not just, here's our problem, the sky's falling. It's like, here's some things we need to fix, right? This matters, and here's why, and here's some solutions. And so I'd say kind of this solutions discussion and really looking at it from more of a practical perspective is, I think, what we hope will be part of the difference. Thank you.
You know, I think one aspect that we all are encouraged about is we have demonstrated that Maine can perform. You know, one reason why Commissioner Heather Johnson is spearheading this is she was part of that recovery, and we need to build on that momentum. I think it's an imperative. You know, is this going to be something that we are reacting when we're in a recession, when we're reacting when we have a state budget crisis, or are we going to have a forward agenda that continues this progress? You know, why is economic growth important? Maine households make, on average, $10,000 less than the national average. We can all get behind an agenda that provides prosperity for Maine households, but it takes a commitment, a public policy prism that says, is this going to support economic growth or is it going to add to a headwind? We have to start addressing the headwinds. Energy costs, housing affordability, but those are two issues that I actually think can unite this state. There's a lot that divides us. I think we can unite on this agenda.
Yeah, we've said that often, that housing in particular, it's not a political issue. It's something that should bring us all together. It's something that we have to solve, and it is an economic imperative to our state. So I think this report is fantastic, and it gives us a really great roadmap for all of us to kind of convene around. It's going to take a lot of work, a lot of collaboration, but I know I'm looking forward to working with you on this, and I'm sure everyone in the room is as well. So thank you for, and it was a very quick presentation, but I would love to open it up to some questions from the audience. We have some time. Oh, we'll go here first.
Hi, Kevin Jensen, Town of Gorham. I wanted to come back to workforce development. I know you got mentioned, and I think there was mention that you're looking at what other states are doing. And so, full disclosure, I moved up here from New York in 2019, and I worked in workforce development for about 10 years down there. I know a lot more about what we did in New York, and I haven't seen in Maine as perhaps as strong of an ecosystem of workforce development programs across the state. And so my experience in New York was that we did a much more of a business-facing approach to understanding the needs of businesses and then connecting employees to them. I just wanted to get your opinion on how the workforce development program in Maine looks right now. Is it a little dispersed? Is it coming together so that if you are a business that is not familiar with workforce development programs, that you know where to start, that you know what door you can enter in and find out that there are apprenticeship programs, there are one-stop programs, there are these various programs that might meet your needs as a business. So I just kind of want to get your opinion on where we stand with workforce development programs and the ecosystem. Thank you.
Great question. I'm far from an expert on this. I have a great person on my team, Erica Watson, who spearheads what we call Maine Adult Promise, all the folks who especially are forging better systems to help adult learners and incumbent workers find the right on-ramp back and to persist in that program on that on-ramp. So I think we've made a lot of progress over the last decade. You know, when we started the process, Maine Community Foundation had 500 scholarship funds. I think only one was eligible for adult learners if you weren't at a high school graduation night. And they said, we got to change something about the mentality here. You know, my WorkSource, you know, kind of attempt to rebrand and centralize resources from Department of Labor is out there. That's a pretty new effort on their part to bring some coherence to the cacophony. I think the Harold Alfond Workforce Development Program is really crucial. It's run through the community college, but to your point, they don't have to use a community college training program. They can use a third party or even an in-house training program and get the reimbursement. You know, there used to be something like that the state had, the Governor's Training Initiative, one of the most popular initiatives, you know, I think in state government, because it was the employer saying, you know, this is what I need to tailor to my situation. So I agree with the premise behind your question, and I think for part of that, the Harold Alfond program, you know, which has only been in place, really picking up steam the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. I think we had a question down here.
Okay, I'm Jacoby Delgado. So my question is slightly twofold. So in Maine, we have a very strong local control kind of group, and I know I've met a lot of the governor candidates. A lot of them say that, like, when they try to steer economic policy in Maine, it's kind of like you're turning the wheel, but the wheels aren't moving. So how do you see local control, especially in Maine, as a way to push economic growth, or do you think it's more of a limiting factor? And if it's a limiting factor, how do we work with it to develop Maine's economy?
So I was going to start.
Yeah.
I received a lot of feedback from the legislature on a pro-housing agenda and integrating a pro-housing agenda into our constitutional local control. Our report does recommend a new tactic. There have been some housing leaders in our state. I think about Auburn, I think about Lewiston, I think about Scarborough. Freeport has come together. There was a groundbreaking with the Dash, a new development right in downtown. I think our model should pivot to some financial incentives to the housing municipal leaders. That, yes, we will support infrastructure for the municipalities that are saying yes to housing. Furthermore, you know, we do have revenue sharing as a state. Housing has become such an acute problem. I think it is a reasonable decision for the state to say, you know, if you are putting up major barriers to housing production, we're going to cap your revenue sharing in the future. So, you know, we're not going to be punitive, but try to encourage these municipalities to adopt best practices. It's just become so acute. So I do think we need to respect it. Honestly, I don't think we'll be successful if we do state mandates. It has to be a community come together, but I think there are some financial incentives that can create the right organic support for a municipal leadership to say yes to housing.
Can I add to that? So outside of housing, right, as you think about other economic development areas, I think, right, there's maybe a little bit of a different discussion there. I think one of the goals that we would lay out is know what you want, right? As communities, know what you want, but base that on data. Because a lot of times what happens is, you know, a project will come in, there'll be a lot of misinformation, right? It's hard to get real information on specifics, and then decisions will get made. And I heard Patrick on the radio this morning as I was pulling in, talking a little bit about NIMBYism and what happens. You know, having really clear data for communities to be able to make their own decisions on is important. And right now there's not a great mechanism for that. And so as we think about working with communities, what does the community want? What are their top priorities? And then what gets them there? And how do we help facilitate that? And MDF does some really interesting work in some of these rural communities. You know, we did a project once and went in with, if they make this investment, here's what happens to your taxes. And everybody in the room clapped and left. It was like, do it, right? Now, obviously there are state and federal environmental protections that need to be thought through. There are other communities, but there are communities who need economic development. There are communities that are trying to keep their young people there with really good jobs, and without growth, they won't have that. And so I think there's a balance, right? Some of that is about what does your community want? What are your priorities? And then how do you go get those priorities in a thoughtful way?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we don't want to lose what makes Maine special in any of this work. And one of the things that makes us special is our tight-knit sense of community and commitment to our communities. And, you know, when we do our work, we work in about 30 communities across Maine on the Main Street program. And you see that in Westbrook and Biddeford and elsewhere. The secret sauce really boils down to, you know, the empowerment and the vision of local people. Not us telling them what they should do or they should do it like some other community. We can't lose that. But at the same time, you know, we've got to find ways. I'm just generally, personally, a big proponent of more carrot, less stick. You know, one of the most successful consolidation efforts in Maine history was in the 1950s when we built most of the consolidated school districts and high schools that exist in our state today. And the state did it with a carrot, to say, we will fund that infrastructure that no community could afford on its own. We tried district consolidation in the 2000s, mostly with sticks. It was far less successful.
We have one final question.
Yes, Corey King, Bath Brunswick Topsom Regional Chamber. Nice to see you all. Thank you for everything. I will start by saying, you've outlined the problems wonderfully. You've talked about proposed solutions, but who's going to own these solutions? Who are going to be, when is the next meeting of childcare? When is the next meeting of housing that these businesses can support and the people in this room can support? I've had an idea that the regional local chambers should split these up, and maybe one chamber is the convener for the housing conversations and one is for transportation, because Patrick, as great as your staff is, they're not the hugest and there's too many things to tackle at once. And how can we do this systemically so that we can get to the creative solutions that we need to get to by convening the right people, but do it in a way that some people are held accountable for saying, hey, you said you were going to be the convener for transportation. What's happening with transportation? How do we do that in a framework, build a framework for that?
In some respects, you answered your question. I think we have we have about 22 regional executives here in Portland today. But honestly, I think we need to, is this a vision that we all support? You know, that's from the legislature, from our next governor. One reason why we timed this when we did is we really want whoever is the next governor, they may disagree with some components of this plan. We all want to know what that vision is, that it's based on data, that ultimately, similar to predictability, we don't want a new governor coming in and he or she has a plan that we're not prepared for, right? So I think we're trying to create a broad package of, is this a shared interest of the business community? Is this a shared interest of our public policy officials? But ultimately, this is only going to be successful if public policy officials hear from the people in this room. You know, say yes for Maine's Economic Vision 2035 and continue the conversation in your communities. So that really was the purpose of this effort. We need that next governor, whoever that is, to be successful with an economic plan.
I think that's a great way to wrap this conversation. You pretty much said what I was going to say. I give the three of you a lot of accolades for putting this together. I agree with Patrick. We need to figure out, is this the vision? Because you know what? We need a vision. As somebody who works with policymakers on all levels of government, we all have to be moving in the same direction. And all of it has to be for the betterment of our state of Maine and to create an environment where families can live here, where businesses can come here and thrive. And I think this is a great starting point. And so I'd like to give you all a round of applause for your hard work and for being here today. And we will make sure this is available. There are copies of this out in the lobby, but I do believe we can also send this electronically to everybody, and this is the conversation starter. So we'd love to hear from all of you on this report, and thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.